Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. In late 2024, Israel notched a stunning double achievement in its northern front. Hezbollah's leadership was decimated, forcing the Lebanese Shiite militia to accept a humiliating ceasefire, and shortly thereafter, both the Assad regime and most of the Syrian military laid in ruin. However, at the beginning of the new year, both sectors still continue to pose a threat to Israel's security, and Jerusalem also has to take into account policies hatched in Washington and Ankara. So what are the possible perils and opportunities that could unfold north of the Galilee and the Golan Heights? Joining us for this discussion include Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at the Mossad intelligence agency, as well as a senior IDF Intelligence Directorate officer. It's good to have you with us, General.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
It's a pleasure indeed. Also joining us from Washington, D.C. is retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly a U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs and a senior officer at the U.S. Central Command. It's good to have you with us again, General.
Yeah, hello from a very snowy Washington, D.C.
All white. Absolutely. It's good to have you with us, sir. And also with me here in the studio, our TV7 Editor-at-Large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, we all remember, the year 2024, 13th of September, the beeper attack, which was a moment in time that I think everybody will always refer to when talking about the element of surprise, the subsequent elimination on the 17th of that month of the Iranian proxy leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and the subsequent capitulation of his successor, Naim Qassem, on the 27th of November of that year, leading to the fall of the Assad regime on the 8th of December, subsequently bringing a paradigm shift in the history of the Middle East at large.
That's true. However, while Hezbollah is trying to regain its strength and is restraining itself, it has never responded to Israeli pinpoint attacks on facilities and personnel. In Syria, there is a looming threat against Israel, and that is Turkey. And the evidence is that when the US administration had to choose between two forces, Turkey and the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces led by the Kurds, allies of the US during the fight against ISIS, Washington chose Ankara. And because Turkey can and perhaps wants to entrench itself in Syria, relatively close to the Israeli border and in air bases, this is now the threat, not Syria itself, but from Syria.
Well, let's focus initially, however, on the Lebanese portfolio, since I think that's the shorter part of our conversation today. General Kimmett, I'd like to start with you. When we're talking about Lebanon, obviously we're not overly optimistic about what can emerge there, but we are sympathetic and hopeful, to say it mildly, to realize a paradigm shift to a country that once was a pinnacle of prosperity, of culture, of so many good things that today is distressing, to say it mildly, to see its state of affairs.
Well, I agree with you on the latter part. It is distressing to see where it is. Unfortunately, I don't think we're on the pinnacle of a change between the way it's been for the last 20 years. In fact, since the first Civil War, and where it's going. To my mind, and I'm maybe misguided on this, but I believe that until you actually get rid of the armed wing of a political party, completely cut it out of the body politic inside of Lebanon, where it is no longer a threat to any decision made within the government of Lebanon, the country will never move forward.
Well, I can't agree more, unfortunately, stating that. General Sofrin, naturally, this country is faced with upheaval of challenges. Israel does not sit idly by and allow the Iranian proxy Hezbollah to soar up its capabilities post November of 24. But at the same time, we are seeing a country that was initially formed in the early 19th century as a safe haven for Christians following the massacres that took place in Damascus, get to a point where it's no longer a safe haven for anyone, let alone its Christian population that is quite rapidly shrinking.
You know, the last census that was held in Lebanon was in 1932. In 1932, the Christians were the majority in Lebanon. And therefore, it was set up that the president will always be a Christian, a Maronite Christian. And of course, the prime minister will be a Shiite, a Sunni Muslim, Sunni Muslim, sorry. And the chairman of the parliament will be a Shiite Muslim. And the chief of general staff can be a Druze or can be one Christian, depends on the person, of course. Ever since there was no census in Lebanon, deliberately because the Christian population is shrinking. They are no longer the majority in Lebanon, and of course they know it, and they don't want to hold any another census for to change the demographic and to change all the positions in Lebanon is going to lead to what we call wild clashes. But if you look at Lebanon today, I would like to point out three things. The first one is Hezbollah is weakened, even though it is trying to rearm itself with its own capabilities and delivering of weapon systems coming out from Iran on smaller scale than it used to be before into Lebanon. Part of that via Syria, and just recently the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, bombed the passages between Lebanon and Syria on the northern part of the Bekaa Valley, which leads to Syria, because they know that we knew that they were delivering weapon systems by properly bribing the guards on the Syrian sides or ignoring what is happening there. But nevertheless, Hezbollah is weakened, and Amir pointed out just a minute ago that Hezbollah is not responding to the IAF attacks, not because they're in a strong position, because they're restrained, and they know that they cannot really respond to Israel on what we call lethal capability. The second issue that I want to point out is that Iran lost its capabilities in Lebanon, its hold in Lebanon. The Lebanese government and the Lebanese president are giving them what we call cold shoulder and telling them not to interfere in the Lebanese internal issues and not to support Hezbollah, which is not part of what we call the establishment of Lebanon. And therefore, you should not interfere. And there are voices in the parliament that are calling the president and the prime minister to dismiss and send home the ambassador, the Iranian ambassador, to Beirut and to close up the embassy. And that means that Hezbollah is more weakened than it used to be about a year ago or a year and a half ago. And the third thing is that the Lebanese armed forces are claiming that they finished the mission in clearing up the whole area of South Lebanon, south of the Litani River. We know that it's not true because we find out a lot of evidence that Hezbollah is rebuilding its own, trying to rebuild its own infrastructures and people that are activists coming out of South Lebanon. And these attacks of the IAF are aimed to deny this capability, but still this is their claim, and we know that this is not full true. And that means that we really cannot rely on the Lebanese armed forces to dismantle Hezbollah, especially not north of the Litani River.
Well, truth always tends to come out when we're talking about those type of situations for the military to claim that it managed to secure southern Lebanon was a miscalculation on its part, despite the fact that it was very concerned about Israel's reaction, considering the time it allotted for the purpose of.
If I may add, just to what General Sofrin and General Kimmett said, there is no natural or inherent hostility between Lebanon and Israel. It was only, of course, they had their own militias, either for self-protection or in the internal power play. But it was only when the Palestinians were driven from Jordan in the late 1960s and became a new and armed force in Lebanese politics, but acting against Israel,
Right.
forcing Israel to respond. And then when Iran, under the Ayatollahs, became another force, again, arming Hezbollah and perhaps Amal, and operating against Israel. Once the Iranian influence is over and Lebanon reverts to its internal games, there should be no conflict between the
Theoretically,
countries.
because when the Palestinian question came to an end, theoretically, that was also the case.
Right.
So we always need to take that into account. Of course, General Sofrin also spoke about the Constitution of 1932 and the makeup of the sectarial makeup of the government there. Of course, the Druze received the defense ministry and the interior ministry, and there were different positions that were always allotted to one sect to another. But ultimately, the Christians have lost Lebanon, and that's quite apparent. The majority of Christians, as the ambassador Tom Barrack of Turkey, or rather the American ambassador to Turkey, has stated, the majority of Christians from Lebanon live today in Paris rather than in Beirut. But let's round up this discussion, General Kimmett, by pointing on one issue that remains, and that is what General Sofrin has alluded to. The relationship between Beirut and Damascus has always been precarious at best. And right now, we do see that this border is a key challenge to the Lebanese state of reasserting its sovereignty over the country, despite the other actors, state actors, that are trying to influence this country in all kind of ways. What can be done in this front?
Well, first of all, I think you and we have talked about this for quite some time, this notion that the United States policy remains that Syria will be a unitary state, a single state, not a balkanized Syria. Now, there are good arguments on both sides of the argument, but at this point, the policy is what it is. Right now, you're seeing that policy in full bloom up in the north as this acknowledgement or suggestion that we have abandoned the Kurds is taking place. And it's inevitable that al-Shara will work his way around the dials of the clock, first to the north, possibly to the south next, certainly to the Alawis after that, and he's continuing to fight ISIS on everyone's behalf. So we still have a difference in opinion and in policy between the United States and Israel in terms of what to do in the south, in the Druze area and vicinity of the Golan Heights.
Well, this disagreement exists, and naturally, in the event that Damascus thinks that it can launch some type of an attack to consolidate its power over Sweda, it will face the Israel Air Force in all of its glory. Unfortunately, they have already attempted
against the policy of the United States. So the question is,
absolutely. Yeah, even though the U.S. policy is very clear about the outcome, until that arrangement is achieved, Israel will not stand idly by and allow those type of atrocities to reemerge on its border, particularly with the cries of jihad and all kind of anti-Israel rhetoric coming out of the very unruly Islamic forces of Damascus. And that is something that Israel cannot stand idly by and just allow it to happen. But General
Well,
Sofrin,
but again, if I could interrupt for a moment, I mean, I think we've got to understand now. I have the advantage or disadvantage of 6,000 miles between me and Syria. You don't.
right?
But this characterization that we've handed Syria over to Turkey in the north is empirically false. That we have abandoned the Kurds is provably false. And I think this narrative that's being projected that somehow the United States is just washing its hands of its allies, I think is a mischaracterization. What has gone on and what was agreed to 10 years ago, 9 years ago in 2017. So I just want to make sure that we've got not only the narratives correct, but we got the facts correct.
Absolutely, and I don't disagree with you with regard to the arrangements that were reached between Washington and the Kurds. Here specifically, I was referring to the Druze area, which had nothing to do with America specifically, but rather has to do with Israel and its national security concerns. When it comes to the Kurds, we will touch on very briefly.
Which is very
Syria.
similar. The Israeli concern is very similar to the Turkish concern, and we'll talk about that a little later.
Absolutely. General Sofrin, your take.
Regarding Syria, I believe that the situation in Syria right now is destabilized, even though the current regime of Mr. Ahmed al-Shara is still fighting with the Kurds in the north. And even though ceasefire was declared 2 times at least, if not 3 times, and nothing really happened because going on fighting. And in the end, he wants everybody to be obedient to the central regime inside Damascus, in Damascus. Second, to integrate into the armed forces of the Syrian national forces, which is new established. We saw that they now established a new division, which is deployed along the coastal area between Tartus and Latakia and the Alawite area. It's called the 56th Division, and they're now carrying out all kinds of maneuvers and trainings in this area to prove that they control the area. And if the Alawite will not join, they have the other option to be slaughtered. And therefore, I believe that in the end, he will integrate into these armed forces, first of all, part of the Alawites, second part of the Kurds. And regarding the Druze, part of them that are not applying to Sheikh al-Hajri will join the armed forces, and the others will stay as independent, backed up by Israel, even though they deny it and they don't want Israel to be involved in internal issues, but nevertheless, Israel will not neglect the Druze in South Syria and will not leave them by themselves. And 2 things we have to make sure. The first one is that there's no what we call armed presence south of Damascus regarding what we call the Golan Heights front. And we are still deployed in Syria in forward position for more than a year, ever since President Assad ran on his life to Moscow and Mr. Ahmed al-Shara took over. We are deployed there, and we are not going to get out so soon until there's no what we call solid agreement that will secure the borders of Israel. The second issue is regarding to Turkey. There is Turkish presence inside Syria. They are taking active part now in the fighting with the Kurds. They are supporting President Ahmed al-Shara. They are giving him weapon systems. They are supplying him assisting him with trainings, and then building up its capacity. And in addition, of course, getting out of the economical side to send more companies coming out from Turkey to rebuild Syria, which will take a long time and will demand a lot of resources coming out from the Syrian regime. And we have to make sure that the Turks are not going down from Damascus and staying north of Damascus at what we call the worst case scenario on our point of view.
Right. I'm disappointed at what General Sofrin did not say. I expected him to eulogize Rifat Assad, who was obviously one of the targets when when General Sofrin was a captain, a major, a colonel, and he's no longer with us.
Rifat Assad was the brother of the late President Hafez al-Assad. He was what we call his right hand, and he was nicknamed the Butcher from Damascus. He carried out a lot of what we call brutal activities. In 1982, there was a rebel in Aleppo carried out by the Muslim Brotherhood. He was the one who was what we call Iron Fist, denied all these capabilities, killed a lot of people, and the rumors were that in Hamat and in Aleppo, more than 50,000 people were killed by his own people. He was sent out of Damascus by his cousin, his nephew, sorry, Bashar Assad, who took over when his father passed away. He lived in Paris, and now he passed away, and we lost a great historical figure.
We will not miss him.
Absolutely not.
No,
Well,
not at all.
we are drawing near to towards the end of today's edition, and the Syria file is very, very fluid, and there are a lot of issues that need to be discussed naturally. But I'd like to ask General Kimmett. There has been a very interesting exchange between Iraq and Syria. Not a very pleasant exchange, to say it mildly. What can you tell us about that, and to what degree could we expect potential friction on the border regions?
Well, that really depends on Syria, not necessarily on Iraq. Iraq has fully mobilized its border guard forces and its Ministry of Defense. They are standing on the border, continuing to improve the border. I've worked with the border guard force for years and years, and those MOD forces up there. I think at this point, simply Baghdad is more concerned about internal issues with the elections and such, that they are simply hoping that their defensive lines that they have set up along the Syrian border, both in federal Iraq and in the Kurdistan area, are going to hold. I don't think they're reaching for a fight either offensively or defensively. And let's hope that neither President al-Shara nor the remaining ISIS elements decide that that's the next front they want to set up.
So the reports indicate, and there were a couple of reports on the large number of ISIS fighters who fled from a number of prisons in northeast Syria. And we had a discussion, obviously, about the fog that persists surrounding this issue. But it became as bad as it did to the point where Central Command Commander Admiral Brad Cooper called the leader of Damascus and said that they're moving all those terrorists to Iraq. What are we to read out of that, General Kimmett?
Well, first of all, the UN has now taken responsibility for the existing prisons such as Al-Hol. There was one prison where Al-Shaddad where there were some escapees. We have been told they've all been rounded up. I don't know the exact number, but a couple of hundred have been brought into Iraq, where they will probably meet a far more severe fate than they would have if they stayed in Syria. So at the public information level, there seems to be a sense that there has been a handover of the prisons and prisoners to different agencies, whether they are UN, whether they are Iraq, and that the number of former ISIS fighters running around is a manageable number.
Indeed. Well, according to the CENTCOM press release, they were speaking about relocating some up to 7,000 Islamic State terrorists from Syria to Iraq. In my point of view, obviously, the perception does matter here, and it does indicate that the United States military does not trust Damascus to protect the so-called the Islamic State type of incarceration facilities. Now, General Sofrin, we have about 2 minutes left, and this is not enough time to cover it all. But still, what should Israel take into account when looking into the broader spectrum of the challenge on its northern front?
I think that we have to work simultaneously, first of all, to keep an open eye on what happens in Lebanon. Is Hezbollah going to rearm itself one more time? Not to the same extent as it was before this war between Israel and Hezbollah broke out on September 17th, 2024. But prior to that, not to that extent, but enough to pose a threat into our what we call northern front. And we have to deny any attempt of them to rearm themselves and to pose another threat on our people that are living in the northern front, especially when we speak about Radwan forces and all these what we call ballistic missiles and rockets capabilities that they have, and of course the UAVs. On the other hand, we have to pay attention on what happens in Syria. First of all, the stabilization of this country. Second, to make sure that no armed presence of this regime is south of Damascus. And in addition to that, to make sure that no terror organization taking advantage of this situation and trying to attack Israel from the Syrian front. And I think these are the three main issues that we have to keep an open eye and to be prepared for that as well.
Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to immediately thank General Mark Kimmett, General Amnon Sofrin, and to thank Mr. Amir Oren for all of your insights today, and to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition of Jerusalem Studio from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
Shalom, I'm Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy foreign minister and member of Knesset. Today, I'm very privileged to be hosting TV7's Middle East Review and also being a panelist of the various shows of TV7, which I find the most enlightening, most educating if you really want to understand the world, the global scene as well as the regional scene of the Middle East. It is worthwhile to watch TV7.